Hello, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Welcome to YPO Presents Ask the Experts. I'm Janet Balis, EY's marketing practice leader, and today I am joined by two amazing business leaders, and it's such a privilege to be here with both of them. Mariame Robinson, President and CEO of First Global Bank, and Jennifer Labit, President and CEO of Cotton Babies. And I cannot imagine two more enchanting and incredible people to spend today talking to about some of the challenges that face female leaders globally. So I want to first start by just welcoming both of you. Welcome, Mariame. Welcome, Jen.
Thanks, Janet.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us, Janet.
So, Mariame, maybe I'll start with you. As the President and CEO of First Global Bank, one might assume that people would know exactly what your role is, but of course, no one tells someone's story like we tell it ourselves. I would love for you to just share a little bit about your background and your experience with everyone who's here joining us today.
Okay, thanks, Janet, and hello to everyone again. So I'm Mariame Robinson, President and CEO of First Global Bank. I joined the bank in February of 2016, so just over 6 years ago, directly into this role. I was sitting on the board for about a year and a couple months. The CEO left in January 2016, and the board said, Mariame, you should be CEO. I mean, so obvious, right? Not really. But actually, it was a fantastic opportunity. Just in terms of my background, so I was an engineer, studied at MIT, grew up in the country of Jamaica. So I grew up in Jamaica, went off to the US for college, and then actually went into the management consulting industry because in the 90s, and it still is that way, they will take young people and put you into really high impact roles, and really you would be held back because of youth, etc. So I was a consultant at McKinsey and at Bain & Company for a number of years, left Bain, New York as a manager because someone reached out to me and said that there was a private equity fund starting up in the Caribbean, largest of its kind. And I thought it would be a good way to at least test working back in a region where I was born and raised. So I did that for about 7 years and then joined back the board of this bank simultaneously. And then when this opportunity came up to be the CEO, to be quite frank with you, I thought, well, I'd been an advisor, I'd been an investor, but I'd never been an operator. And so the geek in me was like, how can I say no? And I find sometimes when these opportunities come, when they're completely out of the blue, you almost have to give yourself a really good reason to say no. And so that's my background. The final thing I'll just mention is when I came into the bank, though, there were some challenges. I was probably the third CEO actually in a 1 year period, to be quite frank with you. And to be honest, I was brought in to help with the transformation of the bank and our pursuit of financial inclusion. And so that first year and a half, I would say, was what I would call a really transformative experience because there was so much to be fixed. And I find sometimes as women leaders, when I look around at my mentors and I look at others in other industries, oftentimes when there's a tough problem or a turnaround, you will sometimes find us at the helm of it. And so that's kind of my background.
I couldn't agree more. I think women are often asked to lead in those transformational moments. And so I think that's a pattern that we all see. What a wonderful story. So Jen, maybe I'll turn to you to share a bit about your story and perhaps what brought you to found this company and also what led you to that moment.
Thanks, Janet. And thanks, Mariame, for sharing your story. It's always inspirational to hear about where and how other people have gotten into their roles and led those transformations. I started my company almost 20 years ago with $100. My husband and I we were programmers laid off when the tech stocks crashed the first time in 2000, which a lot of like younger people in the business world don't remember at all. But we lost our jobs in that. And I found myself pregnant with our first baby not too long later and needing to start just a business that was going to help sustain our family. We had about $30 a week left for groceries after all of our bills were paid. So we had to do something. So Cotton Babies started out of that. It truly is a bootstrap story where we just rolled the cash forward from that $100. The money that's come into the company has been reinvestment from Jimmy and I, my husband and I. And today we have 4 kids. That oldest child is now at Mizzou pursuing a degree in meteorology. And it's just been an adventure. It's one I have loved having and loved learning from the women around me and being inspired by just people who've done really great things.
It's such a beautiful story. And I think that the opportunity to think about how our careers fit into our whole lives is something maybe we can come in, bring into the conversation and continue to thread into the dialogue here. So for those of you that don't know, this conversation obviously is a part of YPO's series, and YPO is a global leadership community of more than 30,000 chief executives in over 140 countries, and it's grounded in the shared belief that the world needs better leaders. And so one of the benefits of being a YPO member is the opportunity to join a YPO network, which is a community of people that connects around a common interest and creates deep relationships, whether that's through the real world, the virtual world, and certainly through the global reach of YPO. I'm fortunate to be a YPO member here in New York City, where I'm part of the Gotham chapter. And as part of the Women's Business Network, I get to be part of a group that's 2,400 members strong. And so the network is a really meaningful community that supports female business leaders in YPO and beyond in both their personal and their professional lives. And I think it's really that whole perspective, that holistic view of each of ourselves in YPO that is so critical to the way that we think and lead as individuals and support each other. And it's particularly it's particularly why I'm excited to have this conversation today on International Women's Day. So before we get started with the rest of the conversation, we'd like to remind everyone who's watching that certainly you can join the conversation and ask our guests questions by posting them in the comments section below, and we will make sure that Mariame and Jenn have an opportunity to answer them as time permits. So we'll continue on with our conversation in the meantime, but please, I hope you will take advantage of the opportunity to share your thoughts and questions with everyone in the community here. So in August, Indiana University's Kelley School of Business reported that, quote unquote, women are systematically placed on an uneven playing field. And so, certainly I think probably many, if not all, female leaders at some point have contemplated that sentiment. So I'm curious, for each of you on your path to leadership, did you feel like you were held to a higher standard than your male counterparts? Did you face persistent gender stereotypes? What were some of the obstacles that you faced around gender issues? And as you faced those challenges, if you faced those challenges, I don't want to presume that you did, what would you advise others in similar situations to do? So, Mariame, perhaps I'll start with you.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Janet. So the question around, uneven playing field and what challenges I would have faced, what I will say to you is, looking back as a young person coming through the management consulting industry and even in the investing industry, I think I did face challenges, but because I was so young and eager and into relationship building, and I was, pretty good with my mind, I didn't realize I was facing those challenges. What I found is, as I moved up into key decision-making roles, when I became a manager in consulting at Bain, that's the pre-partner role, when I became a senior vice president at the private equity fund and then converted to partner in fund 2, when I became a president and CEO of the bank, the more and more I moved up, is the more and more I realized that it actually is not an even playing field. It's nothing to be discouraged about. Life is not always fair, but it's really about the journey that we take, and there's some coping mechanisms to ensure that we thrive. I have benefited significantly, first, from just not realizing in the earlier years. I think that helped me a lot. But secondly, one thing that stood out for me in the early years, where I was able to be very successful in the consulting industry, which is actually a very up and out type industry, is because of my ability to be coachable. Now, if I was sitting here at 23 telling you that, I didn't know that's what it was. I'm sitting here now at this older age, telling you what helped me when I was in my 20s. And one of the biggest things I could say to all persons, but certainly women coming through the system, is this idea around coachability, the ability to source feedback from your environment, whether it's your team members, your customers, your clients, and then figuring out from that feedback what you want to act upon to change your perception. Again, feedback is not about whether it's right or wrong. What the biggest blessing of feedback is to see the perception that you have out there in your environment, and then determine if you're comfortable with the perception or if you need to change it. And I also think, I just want to share this example. When I moved to the Caribbean, back to the Caribbean, I think the US is a lot more structured. People don't cross boundaries as easily, but in the Caribbean, we don't really have the same level of rules and engagement and so forth. And so people just do what they want. And I was living in Barbados for a period of time, and my group of friends were all execs at companies, young people. And one of the guys said to me, we're talking about feedback, and he said, "No, man, I never give women feedback." And he literally said it like that. You don't get that kind of comments in the US. So I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because they'll cry. I can't manage the crying." And he was very serious. And this is a guy who heads up a department at one of the leading employers in that country. And so, of course, all of us, the women, we're like, no, you have to still give feedback, because if you don't give the feedback, people will not improve. And none of us, we're not an island. We cannot survive alone. The only way for us to improve is to be able to solicit feedback from the environment, ensure it's action oriented. So say, boy, when you felt that way, what is it that I did that made you feel that way? It's really important to be able to take that on, and then so you can determine what to do differently. And just to close out the response, the second thing that really helps is this whole idea about self-awareness and self-knowledge and self-love. I think if you really, really are aware of your strengths and weaknesses, and you really think, gosh, I'm actually quite good. Not arrogance, and I really run into women who are arrogant, but not arrogance, just a true confidence. It's like that humble confidence, if you will. When you have that, when you face headwinds in the world, you will be able to deal with it in a much more appropriate manner, I would say. And every tribulation or every setback is such a fantastic learning opportunity that allows you to be even more successful because of the resilience you'd have built up. So I'll just leave it there, but those are my comments.
What a beautifully optimistic and positive perspective, Mariame, and very empowering, because I think what's interesting about your responses that it's about what you can do in the face of those challenges, as opposed to turning outwards and hoping that that others will change. I think that's empowering to think about the actions we can take individually in the face of some of those challenges. So, Jenn, I'd love to turn the conversation to you and hear your perspective of where you may have encountered challenges related to gender stereotypes or other things that may relate to this topic.
Thanks, Janet. So when we started Cotton Babies, I had babies, right? I was a mom, and as our family grew, it just felt like I always had a baby, like around my feet, or a toddler, somebody nursing. And I often did meetings with my kids. My kids always came to work with me. At first we were in our home, and of course, there's always a baby in your lap while you're dealing with a customer call. And then when we finally opened an office, the babies just came with me until they needed to go to daycare. Like, there's always a stage where they need to go to daycare. And it was interesting for me to learn, as a growing executive and growing in my leadership role, specifically with Cotton Babies, how people perceive moms and women with children and our ability to engage with the world around us. Are we able to be as contributing or as contributory? That's not the right word. I'll have to find the word. But are we able to contribute to our environment in the same way as the people that are around us who maybe don't have children? And I was determined that that wasn't going to stand in my way. And so we made sure that the women and men who were part of our office environment were allowed to and encouraged to bring babies to work until that baby was mobile. Usually that happened about age one. And we found, there's literally been hundreds of kids through the Cotton Babies offices or retail stores over the years, and countless breastfeeding hours for the women who chose to breastfeed their babies. And I found that as we invested in the women around us, that it really changed people's perceptions of what people were capable of doing while they were still parents, and able to do both things. And it was also interesting that we found that women who are in that season of life where they're having babies, and really focused on growing their family, that they were staying with us. They didn't leave when a lot of people unplugged from the workforce. So they were able to continue their careers and their career path the way that they intended, rather than having to take time off from work. So for me as a mom, I think that I felt that to be a barrier for me, and just decided to conquer that barrier by showing other people what was possible and what could be done.
Well, I think it's so interesting because it also sent such a visible signal in terms of what you're doing there. And I find that if anything, the women leaders, I find if you, that women leaders who also have the privilege and opportunity to be parents, and I think there are lots of other paths in life beyond simply parenthood. There are many other callings in life that also give us the opportunity, but show how present we can all be, right? And how we can multitask, and it actually shows so much of the multidimensionality that we're capable of, as opposed to being able to do less. We can do more. And I say that myself as a mother of three, and for all the moms that I've had the privilege to lead and work with as colleagues, I really believe fundamentally in that. And again, I don't think it's just parenting that enables us to do that. I think there are other beautiful things in our personal and professional lives that allow us to focus and be present in this moment. So what a wonderful story. So I'd love to turn actually to what unquestionably has changed all of our lives in quite dramatic ways, which is obviously the pandemic. And there's no question that in many ways it potentially changes the dynamics of not only how we work, but how we balance work and life, or how we don't balance work and life, depending on how we see things. But there's no question that the pandemic wreaked havoc on all of us. And I think what's really profound as we sit here on International Women's Day is that, in a recent Forbes article, the quote was that it was disproportionately hard on women in terms of mental health, career advancement, pay, morale, and well-being. So as we think as women leaders and start to envision a post-pandemic world, what do you think that we as leaders can do to ensure that organizations can continue to support and empower leaders regardless of gender? And what do you think that the changes are in the dynamics because of the pandemic that may lead us to new opportunities to create growth for our people and for our companies? And Jen, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
That's such an interesting question, Janet. I think that you either change or you don't make it. And there's been a lot of companies that have had to face that. Like, am I going to try to keep doing things that don't work, or am I going to change and evolve with the situation and make sure that we're here to not just survive, but also to thrive? And so if you were to have asked me this question 3 years ago, I would have told you, for instance, that I preferred to have everybody in one work environment, that we worked better as a team if we were able to collaborate and work together. And today, I don't even have an office anymore. Like I don't want an office again, at least in the foreseeable future. I enjoy the flexibility that it provides me, that it provides my team, to be able to work from home, and to, like right now, my 9-year-old sitting right through that window right there, because he's homesick. He just isn't feeling well. And I would have had to apologize and cancel all kinds of things 3 years ago because I needed to be home with him. So is it like, what are we going to do next? I think is really going to be indicate or driven by what's happening in our world economically. So how are we going to need to respond to that as businesses, and make sure that we're evolving and fully present with our economic moment, just like we're present with our family moment, just like we're present with our business moment. And nobody would have, a year ago expected where we are today on the world scene, gas prices skyrocketing over $5 a gallon. And, I'm sitting here trying to figure out what's going on with, cost of goods sold and transportation costs, and how do I need to think about the cost of getting not just my diapers to our warehouse, but my diapers to customers. How are people going to be able to afford to do all this in this changing world? So I guess in summary, it's just, we have to keep evolving. The world is going to continue to present new problems to us. The pandemic has taught us a lot about that evolution process and just living on our feet.
And do you think you're going to tap into new sources of talent because people, or are you already tapping into new sources of talent because people in some cases can work more effectively, or it's more acceptable to work remotely at this moment? Some of the supply chain challenges, for example, that you highlighted, or could be anything in your business.
For sure. We have found that by outsourcing different parts of our business to third-party companies, it's actually given us a lot more flexibility. Different companies are show different strengths in what they do. And I'll give you one great example. Our accounting has been almost entirely outsourced to KPMG Spark. It's a great program and it supports companies like mine. And I have the backing of a really great financial organization behind my books. And I wouldn't have been able to tell you that 3 years ago. So that's how we've evolved is using our resources, like what can we reach and draw into our world that actually helps to make us better and stronger and more flexible moving forward.
I love that. Mariame, how about from your perspective, as you think about a post-pandemic world, what are the considerations and thoughts you have?
Yeah, just COVID has been such a huge shift in just mankind and the entire world. And for us, there are two real themes for me that jumps out. One is that I think in terms of how we think about how women manage work-life balance, I found 2020 to be an incredibly challenging year. I think at one point I was like, can I just take a sabbatical? But my job doesn't really work that way. And it's because it was hard to balance kids. I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. And, when you're running the bank, you always care about your team, but you care even more because every team member has a different situation they're dealing with, and you're trying to be flexible as you help to manage the mental health. I found with COVID, we think young people are extremely resilient compared to older people, but I found that my younger team members really struggled with COVID. 70% of our bank are actually staffed with millennials who I actually love working with, but it was a very difficult time. So in terms of just what we would do about it, I mean, we have very generous maternity leave policies. We've beefed up our work from home policies. I think that's most applicable to women, even more so than men. I think also just in the way in which we manage people not based on FaceTime, but based on deliverables. And that has to start from the senior leaders all the way down to really role model what that looks like. And so the more we can create these environments that allow for talent to thrive, as opposed to the traditional way of one size fits all, I think that, that is something that COVID has pushed us to be more open-minded and action-oriented about. The second theme that, COVID really shone a light to a number of inequalities that exist in the world. Some of us who are aware of these inequalities because we live it every day, it was no surprise. But I think what I really liked about that aspect of COVID is that more people, the consciousness around just the haves and the have-nots increased. And so for me, in the line of business that I'm in, one of the biggest barriers to just growth and to, the growth of an economy and just businesses is access to capital. And it's even more of a barrier when you're a woman, especially in emerging markets. And so there was a big push for us to actually, as a bank, and before, I was on the equity side, to really design products and to be very clear on capacity building to help women navigate this time. And it was important for us to be specific because sometimes people say, don't worry, just come to us. You'll hear an answer quickly. That's a very generic sort of offering to the public. But we created specific products focused on women and entrepreneurs who are starting businesses under 24 months. It's much harder to get a loan in emerging markets when you have a very young business. We even had a product for women who were going on maternity leave where we said you'll immediately get a principal moratorium. So you pay nothing for 3 months and then your payments resume again. Those things that you do with the signaling to the environment is that as a bank, as a capital provider, we're trying to understand our constituents so that we can create, and not just products, but really true full service offerings to allow them to achieve their full potential. So those were the two things for me. One is about How do we empower our workplaces to allow for women to really thrive? And then the second was what can we do to continue to break down the barriers around access to capital?
So what's interesting about both of those points is that they embody certainly empathy and connection and the importance of building a network. So it sort of brings me to my next point, because it's been documented that network and common purpose and connection in any business setting is important to all leaders. What's interesting is when I first joined EY, I actually did a study with, when I came in as a partner, we did a study with LinkedIn and with She Runs It. And we looked at the differences in women's careers and men's careers to look at the data of what happens over the arc of your career. And so when you look at it, at the beginning of careers, you start out, and let's suggest that many career paths are generally 50-50. But by the time we get to leadership roles, there's a massive disparity. And so we looked at some of the sources, and I'll go back to Mariame, your sort of inspiration of, that there are things we can take action on as individuals. And so some of the things had to do with building a personal brand, and others had to do with the notion of building a network. Because what was interesting was men's networks versus women's networks were dramatically larger, both inside their company and outside their company. And so whether it's access to capital, as you point out, or it's simply driving business or sales or trying to build business development relationships, the network becomes important. I'm curious, Mariame, as you reflect on just the importance of connection and connections in women's careers as they are at any stage of their career, but particularly for those that aspire to be leaders, what are some of the insights you might share?
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of connections, I think anyone who's done well or achieved their goals along the way, because I find leadership and success is a journey, never really arrive, but they've never done it without relationships, authentic relationships, people pulling for you, even when you don't ask them to, or people who see in you more than even you see in yourself. I think both men and women, everyone benefits from that. But what I've observed in terms of the difference between men and women, so for example, one difference, and again, this is just my personal experience, just observing, I would have gone to business school and, grad school. So I was a grad school in England, business school in Boston. And, I find that we all had, our bigger, different groups of friends. When the guys get together, they talk about business opportunities and how they're going to grow professionally and sports. But that's really what they spend all the time talking about. When women get together, and we're doing fairly well, right? We speak a lot about how we're feeling, our families, and we rarely talk about business. And even when we do, it feels weird to say, "Hey, Jenna, somebody to introduce you to." That feels weird. But for guys, they do that so naturally. And so that was one observation I have. And that's a true difference. And we have to just acknowledge the difference and then say how we're going to be intentional about it. And, the implication of that is if you're an outgoing woman, right, or you love relationships and you love, connecting with people, you'll be able to overcome that barrier more easily. But if you're an introverted woman who's actually just as high performing, I would say that you need to be very intentional about how you form and how you network. I always tell my introverted colleagues, you don't have to get up on a stage and talk. You don't have to go and have a big dinner of 20 people. You can form connections one-on-one. You can go and have coffee. You can go to a sport and, share that experience. Just be thoughtful about your personality, but don't let it hold you back, because the road is already laid for the guys. We have to create our path. So that's one. The second thing I wanted to share in terms of the difference I observe between men and women in corporate America, Jamaica, it's kind of all the same, is that, I have this thing as a CEO called tea time, where anyone in the bank can come and see me for 30 minutes to talk about what's on their mind. I actually put this in place in 2018, where we're coming towards the end of our transformation. And 2018 was the toughest year because we impacted all levels of the bank versus 16 and 17, which was more strategy and the senior leaders, etc., and customers. So I wanted to know, are people feeling okay? But you don't want to jump over levels. So you just say, look, come and talk to me about anything that is on your mind. That carries all the way to today. We're in 2022. So people set up tea time with me all the time. But I always observe the guys coming to my office, again, mostly millennials, a lot of young persons come and talk to me about how they're feeling. And they want to get to that next level. don't have the right experience yet, but they're just like, what do I need to do? And I'm just amazed. These are Jamaican person. They all have different schooling backgrounds, but they're pretty similar, right? I mean, in terms of just their cultural experience, they're culturally all similar. But the guys will come into my office and they're all about the next level in the bank, right? Which I love. I love young people who want to do well, and you can just kind of create that path for them and let them go. But the women, what I've observed is the women come into my office, and again, I have a lot of high performing women on my team, which I'm really proud of. But they come into my office and they want to talk about, if they're in treasury, for example, they're like, maybe I should think about cross training credit risk management. Maybe I should think, and they want to cross train and develop more experience before they think they're worthy to move to that next level. Again, it's something coming through the system I didn't recognize, but as you get more older, you started realizing these differences. Just that mindset immediately puts women at a slower pace of development for a man and a woman who's equally qualified, doing well, can have the same, equal impact on the business. But the guy's thinking about the next level, and the lady is thinking about, how do I make sure I have all the other boxes checked before I even raise my hand for the next level? So that is a phenomenon that I see. I don't know where it starts from. But, in terms of what we can do about it, I try to use my role. I think that our roles that we have, I don't take for granted, the journeys we're all on. I also don't take for granted that me being Mariame could not have been the CEO of a bank 20 to 25 years ago. Jamaica was just not culturally open that way. Again, people have shared this with me. I just assumed I could do whatever I really wanted to, right? But again, if I was born some years prior to when I was actually born, it wouldn't have happened. And so I play a lot of, whenever I can speak, I always talk about people who've come before us, people who've come a whole generation before us, who were the trailblazers, who were afraid to say anything about International Women's Day because they say, it doesn't matter, I'm equally competent, right? Now I think it's good that we can carve out our space and take up space and talk about what's different about being a woman, so we can first just get some confidence around the shared experience and think about ways to continue to push ourselves personally and professionally. But I do think in terms of just how we move forward, it's about role modeling and about how do we share specific tips and feedback with persons and never try to change their personality, their fundamental makeup, because that can be very tricky when you say, oh, I want you to be more outgoing and do this. And I have to remember, no, I love being outgoing, but if the person doesn't, think about how they can be successful without having to change themselves too much.
Your story about tea time brings me to one of the questions actually from our audience. So maybe I'll turn that question to you, Jenn, because the way that the men versus the women are showing up and, sort of brings up this question from Anna, who wants to know, there's often a discussion around qualifications versus experience. And so curious to get your take, Jenn, on what's your perspective on this topic for women who are striving to take their companies forward? Is it about qualifications or experience? Do women spend too much time worried if they're qualified for that next opportunity? What's some of the advice you might give them? How would you answer, Anna?
So I'll just do just a little experience sharing on that first before I answer Anna's question. When I started Cotton Babies, I didn't technically have a high school diploma from, a public high school or even a GED. And I didn't have a college degree. And I was just trying to figure it out. It took us a couple of years before I was able to actually go to school. And when I started school, I actually started working on a master's degree before anything else. There's a local university here, Washington University in St. Louis, who accepted me into their MBA program just on the strength of what I'd grown with Cotton Babies. But we self-talk, like we tell ourselves that we can't, when actually we have so much that is within us that we can pull out and really innovate and do incredible things with. I think that has a lot to do with having mentors, but also with having sponsors in our life. And there's a real difference between a mentor and a sponsor. A mentor just gives us advice that doesn't necessarily cost them anything. I mean, I can get advice, from a lot of different places, but a sponsor says, I'm going to risk my own reputation by recommending you for whatever, you know, this thing is that they have in mind for you. And I've had a couple of those in my career. And they mean the world to me because I know that they took a risk on me. And I want to be that to the people who are in my sphere. So first of all, you know, to my family, to my kids, and to inspire them to do that thing and to risk my reputation on the next thing for my kids. But next, for the staff that we have, like, how can I help them bounce into, you know, not just through their process with cotton babies, but also into their next thing. And we've had people who've come to us that were just like me, just a high school diploma, maybe not even a high school diploma, but really strong leadership characteristics. And we have really worked hard to build out what their potential is. We saw it, we believed in it, and we worked with them to develop the skills that they needed to be able to function in the roles that we had in mind for them. So the answer to Anna's question is really, it's a both and. So without the qualifications, you have to be really driven and not willing to quit when other people tell you, well, you're not qualified, you shouldn't be in the room, you don't belong at this table, and you're not invited to my party because, and then, you know, there's a whole list of becauses. And you have to be willing to jump over those barriers and say, well, actually, I'm going to sit at this table and I do belong here. And I realize that I'm, you know, maybe different from all of these people at this table, but actually I do belong here. There's a lady who flew out to visit my husband and I when we first created Bum Genius, our first brand. And her name was Frederica Coates. She is, in my mind, one of the premier intellectual property creators in the cloth diaper space. And most people think of cloth diapers and they think of square things with pins and pants, and that's not what the cloth diaper space has evolved into. She came and saw me with her pile of things that she had created, and she said, look at this. And she wanted my feedback on what she created. And then we talked about building a patent portfolio and how to do it. She taught me so much, not just in that couple of hours that we were together, not just about leadership, but also about sponsorship and about strategy and how to approach solving a problem. So that time with her qualified me for what I did next, which was to become the world's leading intellectual property holder in the cloth diaper space. We've got patents all over the world today. But it was her, like, I can credit her. And that just those couple of hours back when we were still doing our entire company out of one bedroom in our home to really where we are today.
Which to me, I think is yet another argument for taking the time, perhaps to worry a little bit less around the qualifications and maybe more to invest in the network and building that next connection for someone who could mentor you, sponsor you, give you that piece of advice that allows you to take things to that next level. What a remarkable story, and so empowering. Also shows what passion and drive, I think, can do, above all. Mariame, anything you want to add on this point around qualifications versus experience?
Oh, gosh, I mean, what I will say is whatever that playing field is, it's not level.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the tea time example, I was just reflecting on it because I hadn't thought about the question from that perspective. I think when I became the head of this bank, the central bank approved me because I had all the qualifications in the world. I think if I were a male, because in Jamaica and probably in many emerging markets, gender is even more so than race, and youth is also another barrier. So I'm actually a lot older than I look, but I look young, and so that is a barrier. And I think for me, just to answer Anna very honestly and straightforward, qualifications helped me. What I found is whenever I get into these roles, I would always perform well. But to get people to give me that look, I found other people would get into the roles with less qualifications. They didn't, it seemed like you almost needed that for people to be willing to take a chance on what I call an unexpected leader, somebody who doesn't look the part. I mean, I've been in meetings, at the beginning of 2016, early in my career, when I'd go out to meet people, corporate customers, and they'd say, they have this like a young girl running the bank, which is Jamaican speak for, how come such a young person is in charge of the bank? And then I wouldn't, because I'm very clear about who I am, I would say, oh, haha, thank you very much for that compliment. Because I know, and it happened within 20 minutes, they'll be asking for my advice. They'll realize that I actually bring a lot to the table. It's just I don't look like that expected leader. I have a whole like thought and framework about, what is the unexpected leader and how that really pushes your leadership journey more. But yeah, that's what I would say about the question.
So Mariame, I'm curious, there's to your point, sort of following up on that, there's so much data that would suggest that women managed companies are simply more likely to be successful in terms of labor satisfaction. There's a recent Pecan report that talked about labor satisfaction, the profitability of the business, the health of the community, the quality of the customer experience. Women-led businesses thrive. So if that's the case, why do you think we continue to see, a disparity between, men and women in the C-suite?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to Jenn's term, this whole point about sponsorship and allyship is so important. And again, people really relate to people who are most like them. And I can see in the US, it's not as bad as say in the Caribbean, but, even with a male-female relationship, you have to kind of manage just the dynamics of the different gender and how someone sponsors you in a sense. But I do think it comes much more naturally because guys go out and have a drink. It's no big deal. A man and a woman go out to have a drink. They're like, why are they having a drink? Right. So there's a dynamic of that. But the other thing I would say is that there is also, because we have it in politics. I know we're talking about business a lot, but I also look at politics. And I find that, for to be a good politician, you also need that mentorship and that, sponsorship, etc. And I find that women politicians, I see them play out in the news as being, horrible when they do make a mistake or they misspeak, and I don't see the same treatment for men. So I speak to my colleagues and I say, why don't you have more female representation in politics? And they say, because you're all having babies and you have families and you make these choices. But I don't believe that. I have a lot of friends, first of all, who don't have families, and they are very well qualified, and it is actually far less about the fact that they have families and they're making choices to do something else, and much more about the environment nurturing and pulling up these unexpected leaders to do these roles. The thing about women in leadership, if I were running a company and I had to select a board, especially if it was really my company, I'm in charge of a bank, so it's not my company like Jenn, but if I were running a company, I would need my board to be gender diverse. Why? When you look at situations, and I find it more now at this level, where there's an issue in the room, if you have all men around the table and there is a fundamental issue in the room, it doesn't necessarily come up because they don't want to embarrass each other. I hope I don't offend anybody for saying this, but I did ask that question once when I was working in private equity to a senior partner, when he said he was really upset about some decision. I said, why didn't you just say it? He said, no, Mariam, that's not how it works. Men don't just embarrass each other. And I started looking for it. And I started to realize that when there's a difficult question or some, taken to the extreme, when you have to uncover fraud, it's more likely that with that gender mix, the lady or the woman is going to raise the question. So it's not just about, empathy and the ability to connect with people more authentically and the vulnerability that you can display when you're receiving feedback so people feel more comfortable. But there's also a risk management element to it, where if you have a gender diverse set of governance roles, that can actually help the company to also ensure that they're operating within the right risk parameters.
So I'd love to build on that. It seems like you make, and this conversation makes a very strong argument, obviously, for gender diversity and certainly gender parity in so many different ways. But I'll combine a couple of questions from our audience, Jenn, and maybe turn to you. Sydney reached out and asked sort of how we should promote diversity. And then there was another question from Margaret, which also asked sort of how you support equity and opportunity. But how do we do both those things without perhaps suggesting and implying unintentionally, in Margaret's question, that women need more help, or that perhaps women are less capable? So as we support diversity and equality, how do we do it in a way that doesn't detract from the perception of what women are capable of? Because obviously, we're in so many of the comments that have been made, we're already making the case for why diversity is so remarkably valuable. So Jenn, how do you think about promoting diversity and equality?
That's such a great question. And I really appreciate the people who've posed it in their different ways that they have posed it. So I I am a strong believer in self-awareness and approaching situations as if we're having to learn in a kind of an evolutionary process. Like, what is it about this particular challenge with this particular employee that is causing the barrier, and how can I learn from this particular situation, not just about this employee, but maybe how we're responding differently to other employees as well. Like, and just one example is this issue of, that first year of life for a baby. It isn't just about women who want to breastfeed their babies. It's also about the cost of childcare for that first year and how that impacts us as women, but also families. And I think one of the most intriguing things that happened when we really had a lot of babies coming to work, that's not so much an issue now because everybody's at home, but was when we started to see men bring their babies to work. And it opened up a whole different conversation about what it means to be a parent, and opened my eyes, I think, to how parenting just affects a lot of just affects people. It just affects all of us differently. So self-awareness, I think, is really the big key. We're never like in a spot where we know all the things about how to help all of the people around us, whether it's our direct employees or whether it's the people that we inspire. But those people can teach us a lot about how we can do better and learn how to, bounce into that next thing that we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And you're on mute, Janet. I just wanted to add.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to add to that? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
please go ahead. I don't want to
not add. Just also to comment on that. So in terms of, there's a other thing I wanted to add, which is really around to promote diversity at work and diversity in these environments. I think we underestimate the value of role modeling. So the first thing I'd say is take up those roles, take up the space, stick it out, and know it's a journey that leaves us better for it. But more specifically, what I tried to do, so I realized being in these roles, I used to first, it was all about me, and then it was actually, no, there's a broader mission here. So for example, if we're in a meeting, and I enjoy meetings, I enjoy board meetings, I will speak up if I have a question. I ask tough questions. But if someone else has said something and they've kind of dovetailed over it, I use my role. I'm aware of the platform I have. So sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. So make sure it's appropriate. The response is appropriate to the platform. But I use my role and I said, hey, I think Janet just had a question, Chair. I don't know if you want to go to Janet now. And I'll say it out loud and take up the room to say that. And then Janet comes in because she's a little bit more introverted. That's role modeling. The next time the chair will reach out and listen out for this part, for Janet, and she's as an example. But the other thing is, when I joined the banking industry, I had my hair natural and short. In America, it wouldn't be as much of an issue, to be honest. But again, in Jamaica, when I took up this role, it was such a thing, And then I had people coming to me months later saying they've cut their hair, they've done this, because there was a perception in finance that you would need to have straight long hair or short straight hair, but straight hair. And I kind of realized, but I was like, whatever, right? And I think, again, these role modelings, I raise that example because it speaks to diversity, the ability for people to show up in different ways. But it's very important, ladies, for us to do well in the roles we're given. And if there's an area we're not doing well in, reach out and get the feedback. Say, what do I need to do differently? Because we can conquer anything, right? We can conquer anything. So this whole idea about role modeling to promote diversity and doing these subtle things, that is I just want to say, that is a way of doing it without people not knowing that I'm trying to help so-and-so with speaking up in meetings. And so I look for opportunities to do that. I'm highly aware of my role. People reach out to me for speaking engagements in Jamaica at the back, and I give it to other people on my team because I want them to get that experience and to take up the space and for that voice, that view of who the person is to look different. So I'll just stop there. Thanks.
No, it's amazing. We are going to run out of time, so I'm going to ask a bit of a tricky question here, which is in one sentence. You could say one sentence to your younger self. what would that one sentence of advice be before our last question? And I realize that's hard to condense all the advice you'd want to give to your younger self to one sentence. But Jenn, may I turn to you to ask you for one sentence of advice to your younger self?
I would just tell her to be brave and to never quit.
Love it. I love it. And Mariame, what about you?
I would say focus on self-love and awareness, and also be comfortable with not needing to take on the hardest things or trying to prove that you belong, because you do.
Beautiful. So thank you, Mariame. So before we go, I do want to recognize that obviously we're here as part of YPO Presents. So as members of YPO, what benefits have you or your families enjoyed by belonging to this community? And maybe we'll just close out on that. Maybe just a quick answer on that, just in terms of what YPO has done for you and your family as in terms of your participation in YPO. So Mariame, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Very quickly, for me, it's all about forum. I live in a small community in the country of Jamaica. Not many people that you can talk to about both personal and professional. And when you're the CEO, it's lonely at the top. So the forum has been tremendously helpful to me.
I was pulled into YPO by somebody who was part of Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year award. He saw potential in me and thought that it'd be a great organization for me. I have found my home in the Women's Business Network, and today I'm the chair of that network after a lot of years in YPO, and it's just really an honor to get to serve the women around me. Like Mariame, I appreciate Forum. It's just a really important part of my life, having those close friends to understand and to be there with me as we go through the process of evolution as women and as business owners. Thank you for hosting such a great conversation, Janet.
Well, I'm going to echo your forum comments because I have forum tonight, and I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to forum, because that intimate setting is the space, the place where obviously it is a safe and remarkable opportunity to be able to really shape our futures together. So it is a remarkable opportunity with YPO. So Jenn, Mariame, I want to say thank you so much for such a rich and beautiful and really heartfelt conversation on International Women's Day. And for all of you who've joined us today, thank you for being a part of the conversation. For those of you who put questions into the mix here, we appreciate it. For those that we didn't get to, my apologies, but time flies when you're talking about the remarkable things that we need to do to continue to advance women's leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll share it with your friends, your followers, your connections. You can follow YPO on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, pretty much any social media experience. And hopefully you'll be one of the first people to learn about the next episode of YPO Presents. I'm Janet Balis, and this was YPO Presents Ask the Experts. Jenn, Mariame, thank you again, and thank you all for watching.
How do I break the bias in business? I call it out, and I make sure everyone on our team feels safe to call it out. No more silence.
I break the bias by being fearless.
Honestly, by doing it, by just being out there, by showing the world an example of an Egyptian-American AI entrepreneur and CEO.
As a leader, I see the opportunity and very much the responsibility to use my position that has some privilege to increase the opportunities for others, especially more women.
I focus on, one, not thinking about bias, forgetting it completely. I think about what I can do to own my craft and be ahead of the game.
The one thing that I do to reduce gender bias is to ensure that there are always enough women around the table.
What can you do to break the bias in business?
Speak your mind. No matter what others think, as long as you think your point is relevant, speak up. by making sure it's a safe environment for women against any kind of discrimination.
The best thing you can do to break the bias is to be totally, fully and unapologetically yourself. When other people see you being yourself, they'll know that it's okay for them to be themselves.
If you are an underrepresented minority, believe in yourself, know that your voice matters, and use it.
By looking at female counterparts at par with the male counterparts.
You can push yourself to go beyond simple diversity metrics upon hiring, and you can give people actual impact, power, and the authority to make decisions in your organization that matter.
Be brave. Find your way to let someone know if their language or their behavior just isn't inclusive. Honesty is so powerful and it's so memorable.
Make new patterns. We as humans pull the most recent bias data in our heads. And by creating new patterns, new experiences, by surrounding ourselves with people who are uncharacteristically like us, we can create those new patterns and break the bias together.